Okay, before getting right into Hibernate or taking a deep dive in, what I would like to first set as an expectation is that whether or not to use a framework like Hibernate, a persistence framework or an OR mapping framework like Hibernate. That's not so the point of this session is not to debate whether it's advantageous to use something like Hibernate or not. There are different schools of thought, and there are different communities who have different views in using frameworks like Hibernate, and the way to use it, whether or not to use it, etc. So this session's objective is not to promote any particular school of thought, but it's just to give developers try to get developers started with Hibernate when they want to use it. So that's setting one more expectation for this session. So now, I think see what is Hibernate, why use Hibernate, and how to use Hibernate are the three most important points which we're going to look at. But before we start with that, it's very important to know where Hibernate fits in to your in your application, whether it's a web-based application or it could be a standalone application. Hibernate basically fits into the data access layer primarily. So if you have a typical 3-tiered or an n-tiered, n-layered application where you generally have a presentation layer, with all the GUI stuff, your JavaScript libraries, your MVC frameworks, etc. You would have a service layer which would have your business logic, validations, etc. And you would have a data access layer where where you put in code which access your data. Now that data could be in a database, it could be it could be through a web service, it could be through a message-oriented middleware. It doesn't matter. The data access layer is basically responsible for fetching and storing data in the format which is required by your application. So I guess Robin here has asked a question. I will be taking questions online also, because there will be certainly questions which are specific or contextual to the slide which I am showing. So parking it to till the end of the session would maybe remove the context. So so I think Robinson has just asked a question whether Hibernate is a framework or a object-oriented modeling tool. Where Hibernate is a full-fledged persistence framework, and when we go through the session, it'll get clear as to why it is a persistence framework and not only an object-oriented modeling tool. So with that, again, coming back to the data access layer. So I've already specified what the data access layer is supposed to do within your application. Let's see how a data access layer would have looked or looks when you haven't started using a persistence framework or a framework like Hibernate. So you're using, for example, if you nowadays without using such frameworks, you normally just use plain JDBC code to access data and save data into your data store. At a very basic level, of course, the data access layer is responsible for executing database queries. That's what's the first thing which comes into your mind when you talk about the data access layer. Though it's not only database queries which the data access layer does. Depending on your application's requirement, the data access layer could not only execute database queries, but also maybe get data from a web service call, get data from a message-oriented middleware, anywhere. So in the context of this session and in the context of Hibernate, in the context of persistence frameworks, we will assume that the data access layer which we are going to use is primarily responsible for executing database queries. Yeah, Anup, your question as a layman, why do we need Hibernate, will get answered in subsequent slides, definitely. Yeah? And so let's look at a typical code snippet. Suppose you're using plain JDBC to say access data or insert data into say you have a client table in your database, and you want to insert a row into the client table. Okay. Now I keep reiterating that this is a getting started kind of a session, so even the examples which we'll be taking will be very, very basic, and the objective is not to make you experts on Hibernate, but the objective is to make you understand the concept of Hibernate, so that you get a kickstart and you can start experimenting on your own. So that's going to be the primary goal of this session. So if you look at a typical JDBC code, which is inserting data into a client table, what I've done is I've taken a client table with a client name, client address, and age. Of course, there would be a primary key also in that table. So we'll assume that there is a and I've used MySQL as a database server, which provides you the feature of having auto increment, primary keys. So the client, the table which I have selected has a auto increment primary key. That's the reason the insert statement which you see here does not contain the primary key field. So what we're doing is we're just inserting the name, address, and age, and letting MySQL take care of generating the primary key. Yeah, there's a question, what's the advantage of Hibernate over EJB? Actually, that's a separate discussion altogether, because now, if you see nowadays, the Java persistence API is generally the the specification used even on the EJB layer, or rather in the data access layer. And whether to use EJB or Hibernate that's not the question. The question is you can actually use Hibernate in your EJBs too. So it's a separate kind of a discussion, which I think would get into a lot of complications at this moment of time. So Anup, maybe offline, or you can just contact me over email or something. You can have this answer. So we'll look at this code, which you can see right now. It's a very basic insert. If you write a data access layer, what you normally do is your data access layer will take care of the database operations, and obviously the inputs to the data access layer would be in the form of Java objects. Like, for example, when you have a client table which takes in name, address, and age, generally in your object model, what you do is create a class called client with attributes called name, age, and address, and use that as a data transfer object or a DTO to pass data between layers, like from the data access to the service, from the service to the UI, etc. So we won't get into those patterns, but yeah. So if you look at this insert method over here, it takes in a client DTO, yeah, and these are the basic steps you follow to use plain JDBC to insert into a table. You write the insert statement, you create a prepared statement, get a connection, create a prepared statement, bind the values which you need to insert from the DTO onto the prepared statement using the set methods, and execute the prepared statement and commit the database. That's what you have to do in a very basic insert statement. Now, taking this ahead, if you take a code snippet of plain JDBC where you're fetching data from a database, you do something like this. You would have a method in your data access layer called, say, fetch all clients, for example. Now this method would execute a select statement. So it would first get a connection, prepare a statement. I've not taken any where conditions here. If you had where conditions, then you would need to do a bit of binding of data to the where conditions also. Once you execute the query, you get a result set, and you would then iterate through the result set because you're going to have multiple records. While iterating through the result set, what you would be expected to do is populate the data from the result set into your client DTOs, so that they may be returned as a list to the layer which is requesting for them. So this is what you would typically do in a fetch method in a data access layer. Okay. Now these two examples which we took were very, very basic. Inserting you were just inserting into one table, just 3 or 4 columns in that table. Even while fetching, we are just fetching from a single table. But in a practical application, it wouldn't be that simple. You would have complexities where you have to insert a master-child relationship. So where you have a client table and you have client details table, for example, or an order and on order items table. So when these requirements go to the next level, the amount of code or the amount of JDBC code you have to keep writing, and in fact, rather the amount of repetitive code you have to keep writing goes on increasing. Right. So That is obviously one of the pain areas. The other thing is, say you have 3 or 4 tables, you're going to have lots of queries, and say suppose if you take a very basic scenario where you're developing a product in an agile methodology where you keep adding functionalities to a product, you're always going to have this situation where you need to keep adding columns to your database tables, modifying columns, etc. Now, whenever you make changes to a database, a database table or add a column, etc. When you're using plain JDBC, there are lots of places where you'll have to go and make changes. In the SQL queries, you go add attributes to your Java class. You have to all the setters and the prepared statement population. Everywhere you have to go and make changes, even if you're going to add a single column into a database table. So there are a few pain areas right now when you try and use JDBC. Obviously, there would be people who would maybe say that, but still JDBC remains, it's near to the heart of the developers. They know how to write it. You have full control over what's happening. Of course, as I already said, there are different schools of thought, and the idea is not to promote any one of them. But yeah, these are a few pain areas which I could identify. Is Hibernate completely database related? Is one of the questions. Completely database related, you can say so. Hibernate right now is a persistence framework which is able to dynamically generate SQL statements. So as of now, it is database related. If you look at the core Hibernate core, there are other Hibernate projects such as Hibernate Validator, Hibernate Shards, etc., which can be used for other non-functional requirements. Like multi-tenancy, etc., and validations. But the core Hibernate features which we're going to talk about today, yes, it is completely database related. Is Hibernate used in Microsoft Enterprise blocks or data access block? I didn't quite get the question. I mean, I could understand it, but from whatever I understand, Hibernate is a .NET version of the Hibernate framework, and it is a contender, or it is one of the frameworks that you could use as part of the data access layer in a .NET application. Other than Hibernate, there are frameworks like Ibatis, which is also an OR mapping and a persistence framework. Differences between Hibernate and Ibatis I wouldn't go into right now. It would, you would be digressing from the topic itself. But yes, Ibatis is one of the strong contenders for a persistence framework. So quickly going through these pain areas which we see here. Writing insert, update, delete, and select queries for each of the entities in the application. So if you have a huge application where you have say 50 tables and you have master-child relationships between those tables and everything, there's going to be a huge amount of code which you're going to write. You will write lots of insert statements, update statements, delete statements, select statements, etc. All of these statements have to be managed. When you write JDBC code, you have to take care that of opening statements, closing the statements if open, closing connections, closing result sets. If you don't do all of those, there are also resource leaks which might happen. And another cumbersome activity, maybe the most cumbersome activity while using plain JDBC, is that you have to write code to populate your POJOs with data from the result set and vice versa. So when you saw those code snippets, there was a lot of setter methods being called, getter methods being called, etc. So mapping the attributes of Java beans to JDBC statements, mapping the fields of a result set to Java beans, these are all very cumbersome activities which you have to do when you're writing plain JDBC code. Of course, most of the organizations have homegrown persistence frameworks also, which now any homegrown persistence framework would actually be a subset, or you can say conceptually equivalent to something like Hibernate. So what we are saying is we're not comparing homegrown persistence frameworks with Hibernate, but we are comparing the concept of writing plain JDBC code against using a persistence framework like Hibernate. Then when you had multiple records, you had to iterate over results as to create a list of Java beans that could be used. So these are all the pain areas which a developer has to go through in order to make a plain JDBC code work.